This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey and Brian Tripp with you here. And as usual, we have a loaded pod for you as Michigan is reportedly handing down punishment for Sherrone Moore going back to the sign-stealing saga. We'll discuss if that's a harsh enough punishment or not. Spring practice officially in the Big Ten has wrapped up. We'll give you a few takeaways from a few teams that just closed camp this past weekend. Jim Knowles, now current Penn State DC, opened up about his exit from Ohio State. We have some details that we'll dive into here as well. And USA Today ranked all 18 Big Ten coaches who's overrated, who's overlooked. We'll break it all down for you. Tripp, we got ourselves a pod, man.
I love this. I still can't believe we're talking about the Connor Stalions situation at Michigan, but when there's 50 plus text messages that have been deleted from the now head coach's phone, it does raise some eyebrows. And is it Michigan getting ahead of some news that they're anticipating? Or are they just trying to do their due diligence here? There's a lot going on. And the university president at Michigan, who is a big-time sports supporter, just announcing this week that they're heading to Florida, off to Florida, which seems to me to go from a Big Ten high-profile research institution that is a national brand like the University of Michigan. And I'm not discounting what the University of Florida is, but to go from Michigan to Florida, that's I'm not saying it's connected at all to this, but a lot of moving pieces right now in Ann Arbor.
You are not kidding. Not kidding. We'll get into Santo Ono's departure, but first, like you said, I mean, it seems like Michigan is trying to get ahead of NCAA penalties that seem to be on the horizon. Now they're meeting, Michigan and the NCAA are meeting next month, early June, to discuss some penalties going back to the entire Connor Stalions sign-stealing saga. We won't rehash that. We've talked about it a lot. So here's all we're going to get into. Michigan is reportedly trying to and set to suspend head coach Sherrone Moore for his involvement, like Tripp just said, for deleting 50-plus text messages and other things as well. And the suspension Michigan is planning on handing down is a 2-game suspension. That is not games 1 and 2, because that would include the Oklahoma game. God forbid. No. It's games 3 and 4, which is home against Central Michigan and the Big Ten opener at Nebraska. When you hear that, Tripp, is that harsh enough in your opinion?
Man, it's really interesting. Now, the Big Ten opener at Nebraska, but if you're going to impose a suspension, why not do weeks 1 through 4? Why not do weeks 1 and 2? Like, what is the motive between selecting weeks 3 and Central Michigan? The irony, right, of Central Michigan and the Connor Stalions situation.
Yep.
What is the purpose of selecting weeks 3 and 4 for your suspension? Look, I think this situation with Connor Stalions is a lot of he said, and maybe in this case, he said, not he said, she said, but there's a lot of speculation. Everyone's going to have their side of the story. The NCAA can't even govern its own sport anymore. So why are we allowing them to initiate this investigation and try to govern this investigation? At this point, Jim Harbaugh's moved on. Connor Stalions has moved on. Yes, Sherrone Moore may have had a role and involvement, but to me, this is 2 years ago. Michigan won the national championship. Whether you want to try to take away their championship or not, it's not going to matter. They still won the games, played the games, competed in the games, and won the national championship. I suspect the NCAA is going to come with a 4-game minimum suspension. And that, when you look back at the history, right, that's what Jim Harbaugh's suspension was when he was at Michigan, and he's still under probation from the NCAA. So I think 2 games is a little bit, and there's probably too many unknowns for me to make a bold declaration. 2 games seems to be insignificant in this case, but there also is, why are you picking those 2 games? What's the motive behind it? I noticed they didn't pick week 12 against Ohio State.
Or week 2 against Oklahoma. That's a little strange, right? Would you say? Wow. So hopefully it's bulletin board material from Matt Rule and the Cornhuskers. They don't respect us. I can't wait for if Nebraska wins week 4. I can't wait for that to come out and maybe use as a source of motivation.
How long would you think an appropriate? Do we have enough information as the public to really say what we feel like an appropriate suspension should be, in your opinion?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we know he deleted text messages. We know the entire scheme. He's talked about it, I mean, brazenly in an entire Netflix documentary, kind of wink, wink. I didn't do it O.J. Simpson style, but if I did, here's what I would do. Wink, 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 wink. I think we know enough for sure to have an opinion on a suspension. You said 4 games. I agree with that. I think that's what we'll see eventually from the NCAA handed down. And why I think that is, well, you are right. The NCAA has zero control of its sport right now, and everything, the entire college football, the entire college sports landscape is the Wild West. But have we seen, or I should say, what we've seen in the past from them, they do pick and choose. They pick their battles, and sometimes they truly dig in and lock in. This is when you go back to 2023, even though Jim Harbaugh's not there, and now Santo Ono, who's a big part of this as well, leaving as the president, Michigan was they were very stern, and they pushed back big time on any accusations, any wrongdoings. They basically stood in front of the NCAA and said, what are you going to do about it? They were very brash in how they handled it. And so I think the NCAA is not going to forget, and at least I believe they're out for blood. And this is, I think, one of those cases they're going to circle in on and truly try to inflict as much punishment as possible, because I bet you they feel embarrassed with how Michigan basically pantsed them and said, "What? I dare you to do something." And the NCAA now, 2 years later, is trying to do something. I bet you they come for blood, which is why I think it's going to be a 4-game suspension, including week 2 at Oklahoma. And I think now when you see Michigan try to cherry pick and bypass right now the biggest early game on their schedule, I don't think the NCAA is that stupid to say, wow, they skipped week 3 and 4. Definitely not random at all, or definitely, just a coincidence. I think they definitely want to hammer home, and they know that week 2 game is important because that's where Sherrone Moore went to school. And obviously, it's a huge game on the road. I bet you it's a 4-game suspension. I bet you he misses the Oklahoma game week 2. That'll be my prediction as to what we ultimately see. Punishment handed down by the NCAA, 4 games, weeks 1 through 4. So he misses the Oklahoma game, misses the Big Ten opener at Nebraska as well. And I think we can finally, after that, put this entire saga to bed, right? I mean, what else is there at that point? If they rule, what else can you do?
Everyone's always going to have their judgment. Everyone's always going to have their belief. Everyone's always going to have what they feel Michigan should or shouldn't have been punished for in this case. At this point, I think it's too little too late regardless.
I agree with that, but that's... This is honestly, you could argue this is early for the NCAA based on how slow. They're the kings of the 10-year delay.
Yeah,
with some of their punishments. Now, one thing I do want to mention here, because you mentioned before, right? We saw the NCAA suspend Jim Harbaugh the first 3 games of the 2023 season for the old hamburger gate.
Yeah.
And the difference between that suspension and what Sherrone Moore is facing is Jim Harbaugh was allowed to coach throughout the week. So Sunday through Friday, he was there coaching. He just couldn't coach the game on Saturday. Since that incident, the NCAA changed their rules. So however long Sherrone Moore suspended for, 1 game, 4 games, somewhere in the middle, he is suspended not only from coaching the game, but also being around the team that entire week. So he can't be at the facility. He can't practice with them. He can't coach them. So that is one difference between the Harbaugh suspension in 2023 and what Moore is facing this year. He's allowed no contact at all, which is significant.
And I want to clarify too, because I was referencing the Harbaugh suspension at the end of 2023, when most significantly they missed the game at Penn State and against Ohio State. That was the Big Ten suspension for Harbaugh. That was connected to Connor Stalions. So he missed 6 games in 2023 because of the multiple suspensions. So I want to clarify that was the Big Ten suspension, not the NCAA.
And which is the reason why, right, we're still talking about this. If that was the NCAA suspension, it's probably put to bed, and we're moving on. I think we could say, Trip, 2 years later, when this meeting in early June happens and we finally seemingly officially get a punishment handed down, we can put this to bed and move forward. But I figured we want to talk about that since this week, Michigan. But I think you said it before. I guess to put a bow and answer the question, they are trying to get ahead of this. That's why Michigan is self-imposing a 2-game suspension. They are hoping the NCAA looks at this, I guess, gives them mercy and say, yeah, that's good enough.
Okay, great. We're done with it, right?
All good here. Yeah. Yep. I don't think that's going to be the case, but that's what they're hoping for. That's what they're hoping for here in Ann Arbor.
Can I add one thing there really quick?
Sure.
Whether it's the suspension, the NIL, even dating back to Reggie Bush and his Heisman, all this all this post incident suspension, reaction, punishment, whatever it is going to be, doesn't it feel just, and I know I kind of referenced it there, not just late, or it just feels so insignificant to me. Like, what are we doing? The second they found out about the sign stealing, where was an impetus to really, like, who cares 2 years later? Who cares if you take a win away? Who cares if you take a trophy away, a championship away? Where, if this truly is impacting the current season and games in the sign stealing situation, or in a recruiting, like, oh, you had a recruiting violation 3 years ago, we're going to, coaches move, players move. What really are we? I don't know if there is an easy solution or a good solution, but is it a fine? Is it slap on the wrist? Like, to me, it all just feels so invaluable, insignificant, and mundane in the grand scheme of things. Like, we can talk about it. Makes for good podcast fodder. There's no doubt about that. The Connor Stalions thing is great to bring up. It gets engagement. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what really are we doing here?
I mean, ideally, the goal, right, is to dissuade teams from acting in this way. The problem
is, but it's not the team. Like, it's not. Here's my take on that. Like, is this going to impact Jim Harbaugh and Connor Stalions? Probably the two that were the ringleaders of the thing.
Well, Connor Stalions, yes, because I don't think he's going to get if he does get a college job, it's not going to be for a while, which
but
you
they
could
won
argue
the
is on
national
the faster
title.
track.
And they won it, right? Like,
they did. Jim Harbaugh's probably never coming back to college again when he was leaving Michigan. Even, put the scandal aside, he was probably never coming back once he got an NFL job. So you're right. Like, the people, and that's the biggest problem, is the people that commit the crimes usually are the ones that are okay. And the ones that are punished are the kids. In this case, like Michigan, right? Like, I know there are some holdovers for sure from the national title team in 2023, but like, if you're Bryce Underwood, you could be without your head coach for maybe 4 games and your offensive mind for your first potentially 4 games of your career. You had nothing to do with the cheating. You didn't partake in the scheme. You didn't benefit from it. I know you're a Michigan fan, but like, you don't have a ring on your finger. And that's part of the problem. Like, you going back to how delayed it is even if they get the punishment, quote unquote, right, usually it's too late. The person who committed the crime is gone off somewhere else, usually unscathed. And the ones left holding the bag at the end of the day, like a lot of things now, unfortunately, are the kids, the ones that are supposed to be by the NCAA the protected the most.
But there's no sport now. I think I just saw Matt Barry from ESPN talking about this the other day in a social media clip. When a college football player goes to the NFL, they're bound, and he made a great point, they're bound by a collective bargaining agreement. They don't have that much power. The teams in free agency decide, you can pick where you're going to sign, but ultimately you're going to go where the most money is, and the team's going to have their right. Like, you're bound by a contract.
Right.
There is no sport in which the athletes have more power right now than college football. It was a great point, an interesting point that he made. There's no sport that has more power in which the athletes have more power than college football. They're not bound by a contract. There's nothing. There's nothing holding to it anymore. You sign a national letter of intent. Who cares? Portal.
And the problem was it was the other way around.
You have players in the Big Ten who, including a quarterback who may start in the Big Ten this year at Purdue, who left, went in the portal, went to another school, came back, and now could start on the same team, even though he spent a couple weeks at another school.
It's crazy. I agree. And the problem is it was the other way around for so long. And that's why we see it, right? The schools had all the power. The players had like no rights, couldn't get paid, which is also a big deal about it. Mm-hmm. And so it literally flipped overnight from the coaches and this programs having all the power to now the players having all the power. Mm-hmm. Pro sports, there's a balance. I would argue the teams are still more powerful than the players, but at least it's closer to 50-50 than 100-0, which is basically right now. I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what Matt Barry's saying. It was the same thing, just flipped on its head the other way around.
Yeah.
No balance. That's a big issue here one side is happy, the other side usually is not.
No, we went from one extreme to the other.
Right.
There's got to be some sort of middle ground here that's beneficial for the sport.
Well, I don't know if you saw today's recording this on Thursday afternoon. The White House is at least starting starting a committee is the best way to say it, on how to find solutions to fix college athletics. So coaches have been begging for it. Administrators have been begging for, federal help and lawmakers to get involved. And seemingly, at least with a committee being formed, the wheels are turning, I guess we'll say, into how that ends up. Who knows? But at least the wheels are turning. Wheels are turning there, Trip. Let's talk some Jim Knowles here. Okay. We got some information from Jim. Big story, right? One of the big stories in the Big Ten this past offseason. National championship defensive coordinator, the best, arguably, defensive coordinator in all college football, goes from national title to arch rival in what seemingly was overnight. Now he's Penn State's DC. And we got answers, Trip, because when he left Penn State, we didn't hear too much as to why he left. And ESPN did a sit-down interview, great interview with Jim Knowles, and got details as to what happened. So I want to kind of read some of these details for you, and then Trip and I, as we kind of go, can react. So the big question that they started with was, why leave? You won a national title. You have all the talent in the world. Ohio State's one of, you could argue, the best job, not top 3 best jobs in all of college football. Why leave? So Jim Knowles told ESPN that he left Ohio State primarily because he did not get a contract extension in the timely fashion he was looking for. What he told ESPN was that he wanted to get a new deal done, an extension done before the national title game. So between the Texas and Notre Dame games, that little 10-day break roughly, he wanted to get a deal done then. Did not happen. Notre Dame game comes and goes. They win the national title. No deal is there. And Jim Knowles is quoted as saying, I did not want to put anyone, including myself, in a position to have to deal with it immediately following the national title game. Speaking of a contract in his future. And that's the way it happened, end quote. Your reaction, Trip, to hearing Jim Knowles' exit primarily being contract-based and not getting the love that maybe he thought he was going to get from Ohio State?
Yeah, I want to start with one thing. Ohio State did not comment in this story. So This is all Jim Knowles' perspective, and we have no reason not to believe Jim Knowles and what he's saying here. But why did Ryan Day, why did the Ohio State Athletic Department, why did the athletic director, why did they offer? Was it just they don't want to get into a he said situation with a coach who's at a rival school at Penn State and provide bulletin board material? Or did they know they were in the wrong? Was there anything like, why did they not want to engage in, hey, here's our side of the story. We know this is probably going to make us look bad. Then again, they've got a trophy. They probably are pretty happy with where they ended up based on what their hires were. And they feel like we're okay over here in Columbus. We're just going to let this story come and go and blow over. We don't want to start to engage. But I want to make it clear, they did not. This is Jim Knowles' side of the story, which we have every reason to believe. My take on that part, and I know we're going to get to some other, I think there's some really interesting parts of the story, but I feel like it was a guy who understood his value, was trying to capitalize on what his value was. And based on the success of Ohio State's defense over the course of the last 3 seasons, specifically this year going all the way to the national championship, and that defense carrying them at times throughout the year, I felt like he was trying to capitalize on his value. And the fact that Ohio State did not rush right back to Jim Knowles and say, all right, what do you need? And at that point, probably still getting a hometown discount, right? Hometown's probably a bad phrase here because he's from Philly, comes back to Penn State, but hey, this is my job discount.
Right.
To me, that shows that there was some discontent on the Buckeyes side, right? There's all these stories about, well, Ryan Day came into the meeting room, they clashed heads. Ryan Day had a more active role with the defense after the Oregon game. Knowles apologizes in the article for the defense's performance. It left him sleepless. He didn't know how he'd handle Columbus because all the fans there, they're going to be on you even when you're playing well. It's a tough market to play in. That all they care about is winning in Ohio State. If you're not undefeated, if you're not winning a national championship, you're not living up to expectations. So there's all that in the article. But my biggest belief is he felt like that discontent carried over where, hey, I want to be back. Where's my contract? And if you're Ohio State, with what he produced on the field, not getting that contract to him at that time basically shows, okay, we think you're valuable, but you're not a priority to us. The same way when you have a $3.1 million offer on the table from Penn State, and it sounded like other places, probably Oklahoma and Notre Dame, in the article, it mentions that, and Ohio State's going to offer less, a school that can pretty much match anything you'd assume, that basically says, here's what we think you're worth. And it didn't match what Jim Knowles thought he was worth.
What I'm confused about, I guess, is you see how well that defense played. And going back to before Jim Knowles was hired, he was hired because Ohio State had the offense. They couldn't get any stops on defense. Yeah. The defense was a big liability for years when Ryan Day first took over, and even the latter parts of Urban Meyer's tenure. So you got what you wanted, where you now have the best defense in the country. And Knowles, by what he's telling ESPN, and I agree, there's no reason to disbelieve him, was basically like, hey, you give me this deal right now, I'm not looking around. Like, I'm not sitting here shopping that offer versus here. You give me a contract right now, like, I'm in, let's go, and we can start focusing on the national title game and beyond. I don't see, on the surface at least, Tripp, where the hesitation would be from Ohio State's side. They have a ton of resources. The money is plentiful in terms of trying to match salary and, paying your assistants competitive numbers, and you got the results you want. I know they clashed, and like I said, there's been a lot of reports out there that seemingly now Knowles' interview kind of gives truth to a lot of rumors.
Yeah,
because they're discontent between him and Larry Johnson and their beliefs, on how a defense should be run. The proof's in the pudding. That was the best defense in the country, and it's like, if you're Ohio State, if he wanted to stay, which he seemed like he did at the time, I don't see, with how Knowles is painting this, I don't see why Ohio State would say, Jim, you've been great. Thanks for your contributions, but we're going to go a different direction. I just don't see why they would do it. I'm confused by that. I'm very much am.
The second part of the story that really stands out is the whole situation with the parade, right? The quote in the article from ESPN from Knowles was, I was asked not to go to the parade, and I respect that. It created a situation, he said, that eventually turned awkward. Maybe I'll take less because Ohio State's a great place, he said, but then they asked me not to come to the parade. So then you're like, okay, honestly, the writing is on the wall. And this is during the time, to clarify, after the national championship, in which Knowles, at this point, knowingly is fielding other offers and is rumored already to be going to Penn State. So Ohio State did not extend an invitation. Now, did they tell him, no, don't come? I guess that's what he says, right? I was asked not to go to the parade.
I don't think they're in the like.
Ryan
so
Day,
right, the
Ryan Day talked about him at length at the parade. That's, yeah.
I don't think Ohio State's wrong in that sense, because like, you look at the timeline, but the national title game was Monday. The parade was on Saturday. So it's basically an entire week. And that week, like, once he kind of did not get the offer before the national title game, whether he made it known or not, like you said, reports got out early. There was Oklahoma's connection. There was Penn State connection. There was a Notre Dame. Like, there's 4 schools kind of right there already needing a guy. And it just goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. You kind of knew, maybe not some of those schools, but you had an idea. If Jim Knowles hit the market, he'd be very valuable, and there are a lot of teams interested. Why Ohio State even put themselves in the position to basically open the door and invite other teams to be like, oh, Jim, you're looking. Oh, you may leave. Let me come in here. Let's talk and see what we can do. Why they would do that, I don't get it. But I will say, at least in terms of the parade saying maybe stay back, I don't fault Ohio State, because it was, at that point, it is awkward. Like, if you pick yourself, I guess, if you're an Ohio State fan at the parade, right, you're there at the rally, wouldn't it be weird? Like, if Jim Knowles comes to the podium, great season, I love you guys. But it's like, in the back of your head, well, Jim, you're taking offers left and right, and they're going to be here even by the time the day ends. I don't know. I think bypassing that awkwardness, I don't think is the worst thing in the world.
I could see this from his perspective too, and we didn't really get this in the story. Why would he want to go and take the spotlight away from the players, right? The celebration would be about the players. If Jim Knowles is there, all of a sudden Jim Knowles is the story at the celebration.
Sure. That's a good point. And speaking of which, the last thing here that was very interesting, he did not say explicitly that the Buckeye crowd drove him out, like you said, Tripp, after the Oregon game, which they allowed 32 points, the most of the season. He was very distraught. Did not, thankfully, go through what Ryan Day went through after they lost to Michigan, where he got death threats. But obviously the reaction was not pleasant. And Knowles said that he was told by, some people before he took the job, this is a different fan base. There's a lot of high expectations here. They're really tough. And he said in reaction to that quote, I kind of blew it off. I'm like, I grew up in Philly. As you know, Tripp, I've been around Eagles fans. We threw snowballs at Santa Claus. But yeah, when you're in, it's really tough, end quote. I don't think the fans are to blame, Tripp. Like, I get Ohio State fans. They expect the earth, the moon, and the sun, right? Like that is probably them in Alabama, two fan bases, I think, justifiably have the highest expectations. When they don't get what they expect, they let you hear about it. They're very vocal. I don't think he left because of the fans. I don't think also the fans can be blamed for his departure.
I think Jim Knowles at Ohio State was a perfect marriage at the perfect time. Like some marriages, they don't last forever. And I think this was a situation where Jim Knowles now at Penn State, it's the perfect marriage at the perfect time, where they feel like, and he's come in and it's been smooth, and they feel like this is the right fit. They have the resources to get a guy like that. And he's the perfect guy to take them and get them over the hump on the defensive side, maybe make that one or two big plays to win a national championship with a national championship caliber offense, defense, and staff. To see coaches move from school to school, instability is very rarely do you have a coach, and this is any coach, let alone a coordinator. Very rarely are coaches at an institution now 5, 10, 15, let alone 20 years. So I think he was there. I think it was great for both parties while he was there. Seems like, yeah, you could really dive in this article and well, maybe there's a little bad blood. Maybe we can get a little bulletin board material out of it. But ultimately, it just sounded like it was time for the next step for both Ohio State and Jim Knowles. And then he ended up at a place where he was really wanted and is a really, really good fit. And we can dive in and dissect, and I'm sure they are, on the fan in Columbus, everything that was said in this article about Ohio State. To me, I think it's a guy who's just giving you a real honest perspective as to why it felt like it's time for the next chapter in his career. And I think that next chapter is a great fit for him as he starts to head towards the tail end of his career, right? Back home towards Philadelphia, back home in Pennsylvania, grew up watching the Penn State football story highlight show with George Paterno and Fran Fisher. And here he is going to be the mastermind of a defense that has national championship aspirations with all the puzzle pieces coming back. And now, yeah, it just so happens that school is the one, like, what makes it weird or unique is that they're the two biggest rivals going for a Big Ten championship right now. And I know Ohio State and Michigan are the biggest rivals in the league, but in terms of competing for a championship the last 2 years, and then this upcoming year, Penn State and Ohio State are right there. So that's what makes it interesting. To me, the most fascinating part of the story was to hear him talk about the scouting report and conversations with Drew Aller, and to give that honest feedback and opening Aller's eyes, hearing it from another team's scouting report about Aller and the relationship that he's developed with Andy Kotelnicki and how James Franklin is utilizing Jim Knowles as a sounding board, and to get that perspective as an opposing coach. How do you evaluate our team? How do you game plan our team? Every team does self-scouts, but to get that self-scout now from someone who was your greatest rival and had success the 2 times he's faced Andy Kotelnicki's offense and shutting that offense down, man, that is really fascinating.
And that's my overall takeaway, just to end with this, at least on this topic, Chip, is just like, that's why I'm so confused, because you're right. Half the article is about the departure and, the relationships with Ohio State. The other half, like you said, is coming to Penn State and him being embraced. And now seemingly maybe is the finishing piece that Nittany Lions need to finally break through, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten, go to the playoff, win a national title. They have the talent on paper. Maybe this is the edge, or like they're right there knocking on the door. They need 1 or 2 things to go their way. Maybe this is the 1 or 2 things they needed to finally break through. And it's like, that's, I guess, what I'm just so confused about. It's one thing if because I think what you said before is interesting. It's one thing if Jim Knowles with that piece, like, okay, I came here to turn this defense around, win a national title. Job, like mission accomplished. Now I'm going to try to do, go somewhere else. And he left Ohio State because it's like, look, I loved it here, but my job is basically done. I built the defense. We won a national title, mission accomplished. I'm going to try to build someone else up now. And then he goes to Penn State to kind of do the same and be that missing piece. But it just goes back to, if you are the initiators of your Ohio State, and maybe you got the ball rolling for his exit, I just don't see how that makes sense. I really don't. And hearing Jim's side of the story, and now, like you said, his impact being felt at Penn State just so far this spring and what he's doing, and like you said, Al used the words eye-opening about how he was scouted, what teams look for, what they view as his strengths, what they view as his weaknesses. He's specifically talked about the deep ball, how he puts a lot of air on it because he wants his receivers to run under, but he also said that gives a lot of time for the DBs to run under as well. Like, you're seeing tangible evidence already just through 15 spring practices of Penn State seemingly getting better and closer to closing that gap. Why you let that guy go when you had a chance to keep him? To me, Trip, it will not make sense. It will not.
And maybe you're more, I think I'm surprised. You make an interesting point, because I think I'm surprised they're not more aggressive, knowing that their biggest rival for a Big Ten championship is where he was going. Like, if he's going to Oklahoma, okay. But how do you let a guy go in conference to the school that you're jockeying for position with for 1, 2, 3, 4 atop the Big Ten with Oregon and Michigan? Like, how do you let that happen? And I think that is the surprising part of the whole move. But I'll tell you, seems like it's working out so far for Penn State.
I would agree. This is a great interview by ESPN. But before we move on, you interviewed Jim Knowles, one of the, I believe, the first interview he did as an official Penn State member. What kind of feel like? What's he like being around him? Like, is there a secret sauce to Jim Knowles' success? Like, what's it been like so far?
Yeah, seeing him and watching him over the spring practice and at the blue-white game, just a veteran who has the respect of his players, who observes, schemes, doesn't have to yell, he just commands a room because of his presence and his resume. He knows he's there to coach football. He's made it clear football is not his entire life, but he's there to coach football, be that evil genius mastermind, develop relationships with players, and go about it. His personality is way different than the guy that was here 2 years ago, Manny Diaz. But everyone has a thing that makes them tick. But you know what's similar between both Diaz, Knowles, and Tom Allen for that, and even Brent Pry, who was before that? They succeed. And I think no matter what your personality is, no matter your coaching style, if you have a resume that proves you win and develop talent and get players to the pros, doesn't matter who you are, what you do, where you came from, players immediately are going to trust and buy in. And then if you can connect with those players, and everyone connects in a different way, but if you can connect with those athletes, then if they feel like you can help them get the most out of them to get them to where they want to be, doesn't matter how you go about your business or where you came from, they're going to buy in. And I think that's been the thing that's impressed me about him.
Interesting. Be fun to see. Obviously, we'll get a taste soon, and he'll get a chance to have revenge, I guess if you want to call it that, when Oregon comes to Penn State late September to avenge the only offense that really got the best of the Buckeyes last year in Will Stein and Oregon. It'll be a lot of fun here for sure, but interesting. Very interesting there, and some Big Ten news. We'll get to some coaches that are overrated or underrated to end the pod, but spring practice trip officially in the books. 3 spring games over the weekend that wrapped up Big Ten spring football. We had Rutgers, we had Washington, and we had UCLA. We're going to focus on the first 2 because UCLA, so many moving parts. Nico Iamaleava was there standing.
Yep.
I mean, we saw pictures of him on the sideline in Bruins gear. So I guess that at least it's real, I guess you could say. But until he officially registers for UCLA after the spring semester is over, he could not practice. So they have a lot of movement. And their roster is going to look a whole lot different really now, even compared to when we see them again come August. So their spring game came and went. But I want to focus on really quickly, Chip, Washington and Rutgers. I think a few things that are interesting from each coming out of spring practice. Number one, when you look at Washington, right? At least I'm very high on them. I think they could be like the Big Ten sleeper coming out and maybe competing and making a cultural playoff here in 2025. One of the areas they really need to improve in if they want to make that jump is the defensive line. They were awful last year in run defense. They were 15th in the conference in terms of stopping the run. Now, injuries had something to do with that. But the good news is coming out of Seattle so far this spring, that there's a belief and an optimism that their defensive line, one of their weaknesses last year, is shored up and getting better. Number one, they're healthier, which is big. They lost some key injuries last year, midway through the year that really kind of stunted the growth and really kind of opened up the floodgates for their run defense. But so they're healthier. The depth is improved. They've added a few transfers here as well. That was one of Jed Fish's big points, was looking at the defensive line. He likes what he sees, and that should be a strength because, I mean, if you can't stop the run, I think that was also a reason, Trip, we saw their home and road splits being so drastic. You can't stop the run in a road environment, you're in big trouble. We obviously got to see it come September, but at least you can feel optimistic if you're a Washington fan that one of your biggest weaknesses and one of the things holding you back last year should be a big improvement in 2025.
It's going to be interesting on the other side of the football too, because you have a new offensive line coach, and the other unit that struggled a bit for Washington last year was the offensive line. You return Jonah Coleman, who's a great running back. Stud. You return Denzel Boston, a known commodity at wide receiver. They have a lot of new faces to replace a guy like Giles Jackson. They have to replace they used 3 receivers last year. They have to replace 2 of the 3. But Denzel Boston, you bring in Amari Evans from Penn State. And that other stable of wide receivers, there's a lot of guys competing for jobs, but impressed in spring practice. So you have the known in Coleman at running back, the known in Boston as your wide receiver 1. There's hope and expectation and optimism that Damon Williams could be a top 5 quarterback in the league. So all of a sudden you're looking at one of the better QB running back receiver combos in the Big Ten. If you get some depth at receiver and some blocking on the O-line, that makes for a pretty dangerous offense too. And all stories, you and I aren't there, we're not watching it, but all accounts, that receiver room's pretty deep. So you talk about depth on the D line, they can replace a couple of guys at wide receiver and bring back a couple of known commodities, and the quarterback lives up to hype. It's a dangerous Washington football team coming out of the spring.
It is. Unfortunately, Amari Evans, their transfer receiver, like you said, from Penn State, got a little bit banged up, but by reports, early enrollee Chris Lawson, true freshman, came in, looked pretty good. Raiden Vines Bright seems like he could be a star and a playmaker. So, yeah, like, again, you got to hit, and a lot of these guys behind Boston are inexperienced, got to prove it. But it seems the early returns are optimistic to where, again, if you are maybe on the fence on Washington or want to believe, at least the tide is turning in the right direction going into fall camp. Arrows pointing up, which obviously is what you want if you're Jed Fish in a big year number 2 for him.
I don't think you can say when Kalen DeBoer went from Washington to Alabama, the tide is turning for the Huskies.
I like that's fair. I didn't even think about that. See, you are the pun master here. That's so I can't say that because why? It hurts.
I don't know.
It's too close to home.
Wrong.
But they're right on the water though. You know, they got sailgating. Seattle loves it.
I was there.
The momentum is changing.
Beautiful.
The momentum is changing. How about that? Forget the Tides. The momentum is changing for Washington going into summer break. And Rutgers, we just talked to the receivers for Washington. A lot of them young, inexperienced behind Boston, got approved, but so far arrows pointing up. Rutgers, same thing here, Trip. You know, you got Ben Black, siding young receiver, hasn't proven it yet. KJ Duff. Now, Ian Strong has played a lot of football as a sophomore last year. Nearly 700 receiving yards. He's their leading guy coming back, but still experience is maybe not, totally there yet. But you kind of look at right now, Rutgers with Ethan Cal McManus coming back, had a decent year for them last year, played pretty well. And the big name coming out of Rutgers spring practice that people are kind of buzzing about, Vernon Allen III, true freshman receiver, probably see him on the field early and often for Rutgers. Take this for what you will, Trip. 5 catches, nearly 100 yards in the spring game. It's a spring game. We're not going to get too crazy, but he's 6'2", nearly 200 pounds, can bring some juice for that offense. Look, Rutgers had some games against Illinois, especially last year. They put up some points. They moved the ball. They could throw the ball. Outside of Strong, they struggled to find reliable receivers. It's, again, young, inexperienced, got to prove it, just like Washington, but also just like the Huskies. Coming out of Rutgers fall camp, or spring camp, I should say, it seems like maybe there's some optimism that there's actually some playmakers and young playmakers that could be there for a year, 2 years, 3 years for the Scarlet Knights and Greg Schiano.
And I know this wasn't the case last year. It actually faltered at times. If it's a Greg Schiano team, what are two things you expect?
Defense and run game.
And that wasn't there at times last year.
You're right.
But if that's there, you can point fingers elsewhere. Let me give you a couple of numbers here.
Ooh.
42. Do you have any idea what that is? 42.
Is that, I was going to say turnovers. That's too high. I'm going to say, I don't know.
Okay.
42 rushing yards per game.
The number of sacks Ethan Kaliakmanis has taken in the last two seasons combined. Now, granted, 21 were at Minnesota in 2023, but he took 21 sacks last year. Let me tell you one other number. Actually, let me give you two numbers.
Ooh, make it a double.
53 and 54. Ethan Kaliakmanis' completion percentage the last 2 years.
Yikes.
I don't care who's your receiver. I don't care who your running backs are. Rutgers, unless his efficiency improves, they do not have this is a guy that was very highly touted when Minnesota threw him into the fire as a freshman in 2022. His completion percentage has gone down the last 2 years. You do not have a chance, even though he doesn't turn the ball over, you do not have a chance to win with a quarterback completing less than 55% of his passes. In comparison, I'm just using this example because I know it and I'm around the team. It's the team I cover. Drew Aller was at nearly 70% all season. He dipped down the stretch, but was at nearly, and that was an area he wanted to improve from 62% to 65 to 68%, and did. You have no chance of winning with a quarterback completing 53% of his passes. So until they fix that, I don't care who's at receiver, that has to change for Rutgers.
You're right, and it goes both ways, right? McManus has to be better, but also receivers have to be open more, catch the ball more. I think it could help. Yeah, it could, receivers can make you look good as a quarterback. We've seen plenty of receivers do that.
Sample size, though. 3 years at 53.5%. Ooh, that's bad.
You're not wrong. And
you had no idea it was that bad, did you?
No, I did not.
Neither did I until I started doing some prep for this.
Holy smokes. Yeah, let's get some accuracy going. Hit those moving targets more often here. Sheesh. Oh, boy. Well, maybe that's part of the reason why, as I'm going to try to get fancy here, Trip. I was actually playing around with our streaming service the other day, and I found a cool way to put a graphic up while having both of us on the screen. I'm going to try to do it here as we move to big.
Did I do it? Glitchy.
You know what? I know exactly what I just. Give me one more chance here.
Okay.
You get one more chance because I picked the wrong file. And if not, we're going to stop being fancy. We're just going to get to the graphic here.
So our YouTube audience is really getting trial by fire here.
Yes, they are. Am I? Yeah.
They are. Okay. Part, just so you know. This is on
That's fine. No, this is authentic. This is who we are. There it is. We did it. Hold on. Let me take this down. There it is. There it is. If you're watching YouTube, you see it. If you're listening, don't worry, we got you covered. The USA Today, Paul Meyerberg, their college football reporter, ranked all 18 Big Ten coaches. And he used, history, basically. It wasn't just what'd you do last year going into this year? It's everything taken into account. 1 through 18. He had Ryan Day first, David Braun 18th. I'll read you just the top 10 really fast here for those listening that can't see it. Ryan Day is 1. James Franklin 2. Kirk Ferentz is 3rd. Dan Lanning 4. Matt Rule 5. Kirk Cinetti 6. PJ Fleck 7. Brett Bielema 8. Lincoln Riley 9. Greg Schiano, we're just talking about 10. Maybe there's a chance to climb that if Ethan Kaliakmanis improves his completion percentage this year. We'll see. Trip. So there's a lot here to dive into. New coaches coming into the conference. Barry Odom 13. And that's it. Okay, so that's easy enough. Let's talk here. Overreaction or maybe overrated first. We'll end on a positive note. When you look at this list, could be anywhere here. Is there a coach you jump out and say, a little too high for my liking?
Man, it's so hard because I know it is entire body of work, and to win at Temple and to win at Baylor and turn those programs around in 3 years. After watching Nebraska last year be a little bit of a cluster down the stretch, I have a hard time putting Matt Rule ahead of Curt Cignetti, Brett Bielema, maybe even PJ Fleck. Yeah, I think Matt Rule's a little too high. That would be who I find overrated here.
Even though, so he did win a conference title at Temple, did win at Baylor.
Mm-hmm. That's why I said it's tough, because I know it's entire body of work, but you're splitting hairs. Is Dan Lanning underrated because he's 4 and not 3? Maybe. Is Curt Cignetti underrated because he's 6 and not 5? Maybe, but he was at Indiana for 1 year, did win a lot. James Madison. Is Luke Fickell overrated at 11? Well, maybe not, because he was really good at Cincinnati and was good at Ohio State as a coordinator, right? Like, I think it's really tough because to get a Big Ten head coaching job, you're a good coach. Like, it doesn't happen by mistake. Now, based on circumstance, resources, alignment, whatever, doesn't guarantee that you're going to be successful at your school. But just because you're not successful doesn't mean you're not a good coach. Like, if you get to the Big Ten and you get a job in the Big Ten, you're good.
I agree with that. Yeah. No, and that's why, like, going through this list, I was trying to, like, get my answers. It is tough.
Pretty good. The list is pretty good.
With that said, to be the bad guy here, I look at Kirk Ferentz 3. With all respect, I think that's laughable, to be honest. Just because at this point, I get it. It's very hard to recruit at Iowa, and he's been very consistent, and he deserves praise for that. I can't, though, sit here, Trip, knowing the entire body of work, knowing a guy who's been there for 26 years that has 0 outright Big Ten titles, and call him the third best Big Ten coach. I can't do it. He's done a good job. He's brought consistency to Iowa. But I think in a conference right now, when you look at some of these elite coaches and elite programs, I can't sit here and call you the third best coach in what arguably is the best conference of college football if you're not getting it done, if you don't have any trophies to show for it. I think Iowa's benefited from being in the Big Ten West for a while. They figured it out when a lot of teams could not. They would get to the Big Ten title game and lose. They've come close a few times, knocked on the door of the playoff back when it was 2013, I think it was, and lost to Michigan State, or 2015 it was, when they lost that heartbreaker and missed out on the playoff. They have come close. They've been to some New Year's Six games. But, like, when it's all said and done here, we're talking about, like, top 3. You got to win more. And also, I'm going to use this against him here as well. One of the biggest knocks for Iowa, his entire tenure has been offense. I know it's your son. He kept his son employed 5 years too long. I'm holding on against him.
But one thing I talked about earlier on the podcast is the lack of continuity, consistency, and longevity. To do it at one place that long in this day and age, to me, is really impressive. And I know their ceiling maybe isn't as high, and maybe there are some flaws that you mentioned that have prevented Kirk Ferentz from getting Iowa to that point. But the longevity, 26 years, you don't see that in this day and age. And to me, that is an accomplishment into itself. And what you're going to get. You know what you're going to get, right?
You do. Great defense. They're well coached. And, like, I'm not sitting here. Like, I guess maybe to put it into context.
Yeah.
Here's the coaches I would put above Ferentz, obviously outside of Day and Franklin that are already above him. I put Dan Lanning above him. I put Cignetti above him. I would put Matt Rule above him. I like what Matt Rule's done. He's traveled, had success. I put him. So that's 6 coaches I would have above Kirk, or 5 coaches. I put him right between Cignetti and Fleck in that 6-7 range.
Yeah, I think we're both, like, Matt Rule, to me, I hate calling it overrated in this. It's just kind of splitting hairs on the list because I don't know outside of Ferentz. And to me, it's a prove it year for him, right? This year is a big year. Saying? Yeah, this is a prove.
Okay.
Out of any coach on this, Matt Rule and Lincoln Riley, maybe Greg Schiano in some ways, maybe Sherrone Moore in some ways.
Luke Fickell?
Yeah, those would probably be the 5.
This is a big year for a lot of coaches.
Yeah, it's a prove it list. I think Matt Rule's in a prove it year. Like, his resume is TBD for me based on what happens at Nebraska.
No, that's fair. And like we had talks last year of, are they going to make a bowl game like they started off? Is this going to just be the ultimate collapse?
Yeah.
I agree, and I think that's what also the fun part of going through this list
Mhm.
is when you just kind of think about it. You're right. Like there are a lot of coaches. I think it's going to make for a great theater this year. Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of coaches that have to prove it. I think Luke Fickell, yeah, he took Cincinnati to a playoff, and that was incredible.
Yeah.
Now we're going into year 3 Wisconsin, and this team's going backwards. They just missed a bowl game for the first time in almost 25 years.
Even Michigan State, with all the highs that they had at the quarterback position with Aiden Childs and then at the wide receiver position with Nick Marsh, they were way more low. Like they hardly won a Big Ten game. So
Right.
they have to make strides.
I agree. And again, that's what also makes this list so tough is you see kind of who you're going to beat, who are you going to jump. Like it's tough. It's tough to, I think, make some moves and shuffle up the board here because there's a lot of guys that either have done it before or right now are rolling that are going to make it tough to pass. So how about on the flip
Deshaun
side
Foster?
here,
His resume is too small to even evaluate.
and you know what? Look, I think he's fine at 17, but that's actually a great point. Like I thought UCLA overachieved last year. I thought this was going to be like a 2-win team, and they won 5 games. They were like the last 6 weeks, even the games they were losing, they were competitive. They were pushing their opponents. Like I would argue right now, small sample size, but what I've seen, I actually think Deshaun Foster maybe should be above Mike Locksley. I don't like where Maryland's going. I don't like how that's a team that kind of benefits from, and they look good in September against some soft opponents, and then all of a sudden they just crumble and win 2 or 3 games in the Big Ten every year. Like that's a program where that's in a talent-rich state that does get some talented recruits. We talked about it this past, a few pods ago. They are the 4th most players drafted in this year's draft. Like it's not like he's bereft of talent.
Yep.
He's got talent there. They haven't won all the talent that used to left after Chip Kelly left. I give Deshaun Foster in 1 year credit. And I thought they were better than than I thought they had any chance of being. So with that said here, when you look at this list, is there someone you think is maybe overlooked that should be a little bit higher, that you're high on maybe more than Paul Meyerberg is?
Yeah, I think we both had this same one, Jedd Fisch, to be ranked at 15th. What he did at Arizona to turn them around from 1-11 to 10-3 in 2 years. Look at what happened this past year at Arizona. I think he inherited a really bare cupboard at Washington. We just spoke about how high and optimistic we are about Washington coming out of the spring. I think Jedd Fisch, when you look at some of the other coaches like Jonathan Smith, kind of that similar spot with what he did at Oregon State, even Luke Fickell and the struggles that he's had at Wisconsin. Greg Schiano was a early 2000s success story at Rutgers, is a well-respected coach, has had him competitive. There's no reason Jedd Fisch can't be in the top 10 of this list. And I think we both were on the same page with him.
I agree. One other name I'm going to throw out there that I'm not pounding the table for, but I think there's a strong case to make he should be a lot higher than he is right now. How about Sherrone Moore, 14? I know it's been 1 year, but if you go back to even 2023 when he took over for Jim Harbaugh, this guy's beat Ohio State twice, once on the road. He won the first game he was a head coach when that second Harbaugh suspension came at Penn State. That was a big game on the road.
Yeah, it's huge.
Michigan's, right, their national title hopes were kind of hanging in the balance there. Which way were they going to go? After the scandal broke, he kept them together. Very emotional after the game, rightfully so. Big spot. He came through. They beat USC this year when USC was ranked high. I know USC kind of crumbled down the stretch. That doesn't look as good, but in the moment, we gave them a lot of credit for winning that game. They beat Alabama at the end. It's been a very small sample size of Sherrone Moore coaching. It's been what? He coached 1 game in that first. So 1, 3, that's 4, 12, 16, bowl game, 17. He's coached 17 games. Very small sample size. I've been impressed with what I've seen, and I don't know, I know Barry Odom did a good job at UNLV. That program is dead, and he made it competitive for 2 years. Jonathan Smith, same thing. He really built up Oregon State and got them to a competitive level where they were ranked 2 years ago before Michigan State swooped in and got them, where they were pretty good. I think Sherrone Moore's he's been in some big spots and came through. I think he should be higher.
The more we talk about it, the more I examine the list. Luke Fickell's too high.
See, that's another one. I think it's very tough because he did make it is. And I'm trying to respect USA Today in taking everything into account, not being a prisoner of the moment. He did get Cincinnati to a playoff, which is very impressive. The year before that, they made it to a New Year's Six game. And
you're right. You're right.
Like
You're
it's, but you are, but that, if anything, that highlights how important this year is because he's kind of almost thrown all that away in 2 years in Madison.
That's same as Lincoln Riley.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, he's not. It's like I feel like
Lincoln Riley.
and it's crazy where it's like you wouldn't even bat an eye. Yeah, that's about right for a guy who has produced 3 Heisman Trophy winners, made the playoff multiple times, nearly made a national title game 1 year. Baker Mayfield, and here we are saying 9th best. Yeah, that's about right. Like,
man, the storyline like fascinating.
It is. This is a great list, and this has produced a lot of. This has been a lot of fun. I know you hate lists, especially this year. This early in the year. No, I
hate rankings, but if you want to start talking about the storylines of each team and coach and pressure and expectations, and we're sitting here on May 7th recording a podcast. Man, I can't wait till September.
And even David Braun at 18, the guy was a Big Ten coach 2 years ago.
By the way, rumor has it the TV draft occurred.
Oh, really?
So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we'll start getting some TV times dropping.
Are there any?
Fox is going to air Michigan and Ohio State. There you go. Breaking news.
Right from the source. Can we credit Brian Tripp for that? As first reported by Brian Tripp. Big noon kickoff, the last weekend of November, it
usually is end of May, beginning of June is when those times and announcements start to roll out. Beginning of June.
Off the top of my head, I'm going to assume big noon kickoff. I think that's the one that people focus on the most.
Yep.
Big noon kickoff. I assume week 1 is going to be Ohio State, Texas. I feel pretty good at assuming, I don't know what week it is. I think it's week 5, maybe end of September, Penn State, Oregon. I feel pretty good about that being a big noon kickoff. Feel good about Ohio State, Penn State, November 1st. You shake your head. Are you just, in what sense do you disagree?
Fox gets the first 3 picks, and you're naming 4 games. So one of the 4 won't be on Fox.
That's a good point. Okay, that's fair. I forgot how the draft worked. Okay.
Unless there was a trade. Right.
Which of the 4 then, really quickly, which of the 4 would you guess Fox doesn't have? If we go Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Penn State. Well, we'll take out Michigan, Ohio State. That's going to be in there. My guess would be Penn State, Oregon would be the one they let go.
I would agree with that.
Hopefully we'll find out soon. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of reaction. And whoever's team is selected, I'll be a lot of anger reaction as to why is this big game airing at noon, or if you're in the Central Time Zone, 11 Eastern, which is even more absurd and egregious. Yeah. Welcome. I've actually, you know what?
What do I call it? Fodder. Let's go have fodder for June to talk about.
You got me. I forgot about it. Life was good for the 2 months. I forgot about big noon kickoff and the controversy that does cause. Oh boy. All right. Well, we'll end the pod here. We'll end on a sour note, if you will, saying those cursed words, big noon kickoff. Thank you for joining us here. As always, subscribe wherever you get your pods, and on YouTube, still enrolled. New content coming out every single week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend. Talk to you next week right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.